Item on this agenda for this morning before we take a lunch break. I will be presenting our update on the current work of the task force with my colleague Hilary Wilkinson. And we'll start off with a little bit of an overview of the organization. I saw in the morning's poll that there's about 45% of the folks on the call today have not actually attended one of our meetings. So I want to welcome you all to your first annual meeting. And as such, I'll start with a little quick overview of kind of how we got started and who we are, and then we'll dive into our work. Great, thank you for the first slide. So basically the formation of the task force was really driven by two pivotal events. Next slide, please. The first being the barge Nestucca that it was struck by its tug and caused a spill along the western coast of Washington that then moved up into British Columbia. And a total of 175,000 gallons were released in that spill. And that caused the premier of British Columbia at the time and the governor of Washington to come together to try to delegate some more resources and power towards planning and preparing better for such incidents. About 6 months later after that, next slide, was the Exxon Valdez spill. And this really prompted a larger collaboration across the Western coast, including Canada and Oregon joining the task force. And then later in 2001, Hawaii joined. And really the purpose of this organization is to enhance prevention, preparedness, response, and technology sharing across the West Coast, and an open forum and open dialogue for those folks managing these programs across the jurisdictions to have dialogue, have engagement with stakeholders, and actually learn a lot as we go along about how to continually improve to protect the resources across the West Coast. Next slide, please. This is just a photo of the early task force members on the shores of Prince William Sound in 1990. And one of the premier products that came out of this early group, next slide please, is the landmark report that was a study, or it was a report that included major findings from the initial work of this organization, which include assessing the weaknesses and challenges and shortcomings of the spills that had preceded, including vessel design shortcomings, traffic management issues, regulatory gaps, and so forth. And this document contained about 46 recommendations for improvements to spill prevention response across the West Coast, particularly for each individual jurisdiction as well. And this document also became fodder and kind of foundational information shared with Congress during the formation of the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, and was also important information in the Canadian Shipping Act amendments in 93. So that's kind of a rapid fire synopsis of how we came to be. Next slide, please. And these are the current member agencies of the task force. You just heard from each of them. Our task force executives represent and coordinating committee members represent these agencies shown. Next slide, please. And we partner with oil industry response companies, public interest groups, and state and local governments. Next slide, as well as tribes and First Nations, multiple federal and US Canadian federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, and citizen groups. So our purpose is to both engage stakeholders and the public and our partners, and also share out information that we're working on and noodling on as an organization internally. Next slide. So we operate off of a strategic plan, and our biennial work plans spin off of those strategic plans. We last completed our current strategic plan last year, and there's the busybodies working away. Next slide. Our current strategic plan has the vision of no spilled oil. Our mission is working together to improve the Pacific Coast prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery from oil spills. And our goals really focus on a safe and clean environment, external partnerships, and our organizational well-being. And that's kind of the areas that we focus on across our work. Next slide, please. The structure of the task force is such that we have the task force executive member body. You heard from all 6 of them this morning. They provide strategic guidance and direction, as well as support our ongoing work of sustaining and maintaining partnerships. The coordinating committee are the staff managers and staff of those organizations who I help, who essentially are doing the project tasks, work plan implementation, and support this across jurisdictional exchange. We have monthly meetings where we basically share out lessons learned, what's going on in your jurisdiction, what do you need help with? Those kind of exchanges really help promote the work within this organization. And as executive coordinator team, myself and Hilary Wilkinson, who you'll hear from in a moment, our role is really to help support the project management of these efforts and facilitate meetings and communication efforts, and really essentially cat herd. And we're really happy to do it. Next slide, please. So we'll switch now to talk a little about some of our current work. This is not the entire body of the work we do, but this is some of the current projects that are underway. I'm going to start off by handing the mic over to Hilary, who's going to talk to you about a couple of projects, and then I'll come back to wrap it up. Thanks, Hilary.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. So I want to start by acknowledging I'm calling in from Bellingham, Washington, the traditional lands of the Lummi people. And I'm going to share just a couple projects that I lead for the task force and some highlights of what's going on right now. So next slide, please. So one big project we've been working on is addressing abandoned and derelict vessels. A couple years ago, the task force stood up a work group comprised of experts on ADVs from all of our task force jurisdictions and other agencies. And this group met for the last couple of years to really try to get a handle on the scope and scale of the problem across the West Coast. This problem was identified as a significant challenging issue by all of our jurisdictions. So hence the standing up of this particular work group. Next slide, please. I'm sharing this picture because this ADV that happened in California is kind of a perfect illustration of the challenge that the task force jurisdictions are facing as regards ADV. This is a fishing vessel that ran aground near a state park in California. The Coast Guard came in, removed the oil, but then their jurisdictional authority ended. The vessel remained. The state of California was kind of left holding the bag because the owner of the vessel had no insurance and walked away from the problem. So the state of California has no commercial ADV program, but they do have a recreational program. And this particular vessel didn't qualify for the recreational program. So there's no funding to remove it. So that's just kind of a little poster child of the types of issues that the states are confronting. One thing before I move on is I will mention that this ADV work group focused primarily on the US states because Canada regulates ADVs at a federal level. So it's a very different issue up there. So everything from here on out is addressing the 5 task force states. And next slide, please. So the ADV work group, its first task was to put out a white paper that kind of quantified the scope and scale of the problem across the West Coast. We published this in 2019. It's available on our website. Next slide, please. And then following the white paper, the group basically looked to see what would a blue ribbon program for the states look like? What would a comprehensive ADV program look like? So they published this ADV Blue Ribbon report in January of this year. And the purpose of it was really to create a framework for a model program that can be adopted by all of the West Coast states, but also perhaps be used as kind of a national model for other states as well. Next slide, please. This is a cover of that Blue Ribbon report. It's available on our website, as is the white paper. Next slide. And the Blue Ribbon program, just very quickly, I want to touch on sort of what it addresses. The work group members concluded there were 5 critical areas the comprehensive program needed to address: authorities, prevention, funding, removal and deconstruction, and public outreach and education. And so the report has 33 specific recommendations across these 5 categories for the states to implement. And if all 33 of those were implemented, that would comprise a comprehensive program. And the report also included 6 recommendations to our federal partners to kind of deal with ADVs at the federal level and partner with the states. Next slide, please. Here's a very small smattering example recommendations for our prevention category, just to give you a little flavor of the types of things that we're recommending. One is establishing vessel registration systems. Second, establish comprehensive databases. Third, require wreck removal insurance. Fourth, establish secondary liability laws. Fifth, establish vessel turn-in programs. Next slide, please. And where we're at right now, our publication date for this Blue Ribbon program was in January of 2020. So our timing couldn't have been more horrible in terms of trying to get attention and traction on the issue. So we didn't get the attention and traction on the issue that we really hoped to this year. So we're kind of eyeing 2021 to try to get a little more, push these recommendations a little bit more and make some headway on them. So one of the things we'd like to do in 2021 is host a roundtable where we can highlight some of the progress that the states are making in implementing these recommendations or programs that they're putting in place. Things like what's happening in Oregon right now, which is super exciting, where the Oregon Marine Board received some NOAA marine debris funding in order to work directly with marina managers and change kind of how marina managers work with vessel operators to try to prevent more ADVs from entering the waste stream. Next slide, please. Okay, so that kind of quickly wraps our ADV work. The next project I'm going to talk quickly about is our work with what we call POSPET, which is the Pacific Oil Spill Prevention Education Team. This is another work group for the task force that is comprised primarily of educators and communicators across the task force jurisdictions. They work with nonprofit organizations, they work within the task force agencies, and their primary focus is on excuse me, preventing small spills. They work mostly trying to educate recreational boat owners, try to reduce small spills in marinas, things like that. This is actually a picture of my daughter 3 years ago looking at one of the kind of signature products of POSPET, which is our Spills Aren't Slick educational materials, which get posted in marinas up and down the West Coast. Next slide, please. And these are just some of the products that POSPET members are pushing out to marina managers, pushing out to recreational boaters, pushing out to fuel dock operators. So the Spills Aren't Slick sign here, you've probably seen in marinas somewhere up and down the West Coast, possibly beyond. In the upper right-hand corner, this is a boater kit that is really great and provides recreational boaters with products that they can basically quickly address small spills. And then the lower right-hand corner is what we call a fuel tag, which we work with fuel dock operators to hang these little tags on their fuel systems so that to remind people not to drip into the water. Next slide, please. One of the really great things that our POSPET members are involved with is certifying clean marinas. 5 of our 6 task force jurisdictions have these clean marinas certification programs. And these are kind of our current numbers. They might be slightly different, but they work really, really hard to work with marina managers to keep those marinas as spill-free as possible. Next slide, please. Those outreach and education products, the Spills Aren't Slick signs, they post this 1-800-OILS-911 number, which is a reporting number so that anybody who sees a small spill can report it. This is a graph where we just track the calls that come in from the jurisdictions that have this number. This number routes to the emergency centers for each of the jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Now, this is kind of my last thing. Where we're kind of heading in 2021 with POSPET is we're working collaboratively to try to come up with a green boating webinar that would be applicable for recreational boaters up and down the West Coast. We're going to pilot it in the Salish Sea, so with British Columbia and Washington, just to try to, there's a lot of complications with different requirements and protocols and things. So we're going to pilot it there and see if we can't broaden it out and create a webinar that would help recreational boaters up and down the West Coast learn best practices, rules and regulations in their area, and basically be better boaters that have less impact. Another thing that the POSPET members are working on in the upcoming year is pulling together what we're calling an ADV, Abandoned Derelict Vessel Digital Toolkit. This would be a digital kind of resource for outreach experts across our jurisdictions to have kind of quick examples of abandoned and derelict vessel stories, messaging about it, things like that, that could quickly kind of be used and applicable across our task force jurisdictions. So that's it for the ADV work group and POSPIT. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Hilary. Moving right along, a couple other projects we have underway. So our crude transport study started in 2013 in an effort to really start tracking the movement of crude by rail, vessel, pipeline, and barge across the western states and BC. And one of the first products out of that was this map that depicts through the various color schemes and color coding those different routes. This map is available on our website. It's updated annually to reflect any changes in the transport routes. And it's also in our annual report every year. Next slide. Associated with this project is also the data we collect. These graphics are pulled right out from our annual report, so they may see a little fuzzy here. But these basically indicate the kind of data we're collecting, both the volumes and also kind of trends over time of how much material is moving across the jurisdictions. Next slide. We have a spill capacity work group that started up about a year ago. And the intention for this was to take a look at our mutual aid agreement and determine how best we are suited to respond to sharing cascading equipment and personnel in the case of a spill. So one of the early tasks of this work group was to develop a roster of spill response capability of personnel across the ICS personnel categories, as well as to develop a list of equipment. And that equipment is really posted on the World Response Resource List where available, or in another form of an inventory. So our next step with this group is to actually revise and update our mutual aid agreement. And that's a process we're involved in this winter. And the next step after that is to actually do a tabletop exercise and sort of test it out, see how it works. Next slide. Our oil spill database work group continues. This started in 2002 to collect the data of oil spills across the West Coast by material, by volume, by receiving medium, whether it's on land or water. Currently, we collect oil spill data from all the 5 states. And as Laura pointed out earlier today, that BC is ready and poised to start adding their oil spill data to our data set. So this is a trend graphic showing the number of spills and the volumes across the years that this data set has been developed. And it's available on our website. The comprehensive report has just tons and tons of detailed graphics around individual particular types of materials and locations and by jurisdiction. It's really cut and diced in many different ways. So if you haven't seen that, it's worth taking a look at. Next, please. Our oil spill data is also in IRMA. In this case, you can go in and click on a few boxes to see visually depicted the year of the spill, a size of the spill, the medium it was spilled on, and that sort of thing. So you can go in and manipulate the data just to see it depicted across the jurisdictions. It's pretty cool. Thank you to NOAA. I'll nod out to our NOAA friends for incorporating this data set into IRMA. Next slide, please. Our drills and exercise work group, this was pulled together in the last year or so as part of this particular annual biannual work plan. The 2 areas of focus for this work group is to develop kind of an inventory of spill requirements by jurisdiction. There are some variations across the different task force jurisdictions on what requirements are in place for plan holders with response to drills and exercises. And we've created sort of an inventory of detailed information around what those requirements are so that the jurisdiction can look across and see what each other are doing and requiring. And the other thing this work group does is meet regularly, quarterly, in fact, to kind of share out lessons learned from recent drills and share information around that's pertinent for the success of these events. Later today, you'll hear about the drills and exercise work group lessons learned from COVID, and I'm looking forward to hearing that session. So next slide, please. I'll just wrap up with a couple more slides here. So our communications is ongoing. This is the new annual report. There's a link in on the webpage, and I believe there'll be a link to the actual report in the chat today. We essentially summarize our current projects and work and provide a little context of the organization as well. We also update our website, and all other forms of typical kind of e-communication are underway as well. Next slide. You've seen us probably a lot of these events, Clean Pacific and IOSC particularly, and of course our outreach events are the annual meetings we host every year, and then we co-hosted the COC Shared Waters Forum events the last 3 years. And on to the next slide. And this, given this virtual context, we're really thinking about kind of what else can we do to continue to engage our partners, our stakeholders, our communities, and continue to put out information and collaborate on issues and emerging topics. So we're proposing to pull together a number of webinars in this next year around topics that we as the task force have kind of brainstormed and noodled, but we also would love to hear your thoughts. And so before I leave you for lunch, I'm going to pop up a poll that will show you a kind of list of topics we're interested in hosting for roundtables in this next year. These would be short, maybe hour or two webinars, roundtables on topics of interest. And Caleb, would you mind posting that poll, please? And I would love to have you guys just go tick down the topics that are of interest to you, and we'll bring that in to kind of help us shape and craft the topics and issues we may bring in the next 12 months as we start pulling in more virtual opportunities to connect with you all and share information.
Sarah, I did just cancel the poll. It looks like the option to select multiples did not get selected, so I'm editing that just a moment. We should be able to have that going.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, Caleb, we could do it at the end of the day today too. We could fix it.
Either way, it should take me just a moment. So.
Okay. All right. At any rate, I will head on to the next slide before we wrap up. Really just to thank and acknowledge the Oilsville Task Force members and the coordinating committee members for all the hard work in pulling these events together and participating and showing up. And it's great to see everyone. Sadly, we're not in person, but we should be soon, hopefully. Caleb, I'll let folks go to lunch because it's a little after our break time, and we'll do this poll at the end of our next session. So with that, I'm going to dismiss you all for lunch.